Alright, new week, new video. Time to go reset my waypoint. For once, it's actually appropriate that I'm in Sumeru because the new character is from Sumeru. Hello. As you guys are probably aware, I have already made a video about Nefer, but it actually wasn't totally about Nefer. It was about a lot of things relating to her and some things that I wanted to say that were brought up by me getting Nefer. But I've been enjoying her very much as a unit, and I decided that I think I do just want to give her an actual dedicated video. One that's more in my style, one that shows how to build teams and some fun teams for Nefer, without all the baggage that the first video has. This video is going to assume that you, for the most part, know how Nefer's kit works. I'm gonna go over a few small things, but if you want the details, go check out my last video. But I actually didn't talk about gear options at all in that video, so let's just pick up where we left off. For weapons, Nefer does not have a ton of options. She is a character who pretty much only scales on two stats, that being EM and crit. Other stats have varying levels of effectiveness, but those are the only two that she really actually wants. So that means she has very few options for actually both weapons and artifacts, but we'll just start off with the weapons. With this one right here being a decently achievable option. This is Dawning Frost. It is a brand new gacha weapon featuring on this banner that she released on. It is very obviously made for her. Crit damage substat gives you EM when you hit a charged attack and more when you hit a skill. Her charge attack is her main source of damage and she has to use her skill to get to that charge attack, so these conditions are very easily met. Now I need to go to a smith so I can talk about the craftable because I haven't made one. That's why I pulled this weapon, so I wouldn't have to make the craftable. Because the Nodcry craftable, the Black Marrow Lantern, is another weapon that's custom made for her. It has an EM substat with Lunar Bloom damage bonus in the passive, and with refinements, this actually becomes quite the powerful weapon. Refinement 5 of the craftable is very slightly below, but very competitive with R1 of Dawning Frost. And refinement 5 of Dawning Frost is her second best option in the game. Of course, only behind her own signature. And those are pretty much the three main options for her. Nahida, Lali, Mizuki, and Lauma's signatures can all be used on her just as generic EM stat sticks. They are okay weapons, but none of them are good enough to really justify going for. Her non-signature 5-star weapon options tend to fall around the R1 to 3 range of Dawning Frost. If you are looking for a weapon for Nefer, these three options should pretty much be your only considerations. And as I was editing, I remembered two last weapon options that I wanted to mention. Number one, and I do this with hesitation, is Widsith. Has that same crit damage substat as Dawning Frost does, and it can give you EM. I've stopped hating on the Widsith gamble as much as I used to. I still can't get over how terrible that feels. Widsith does average out to be on par with Black Marrow, but if you're like me and you don't want to deal with the 1 in 3 chance of Widsith actually giving you a useful buff, then you might just want to go ahead and craft the craftable. The other option, and this is kind of funny and gimmicky, is Sack Frags. Given that her skill is split into 2 charges, it already lets her rotate faster than the theoretical 18-second rotations that she should have, because she has 2 charges of a skill with a 9-second cooldown, so it takes 18 seconds to recharge both charges. Because the cooldown is split into charges, she can essentially borrow time from the next rotation to rotate faster. But if she rotates like that too many times and keeps borrowing from the next rotation, she'll reach a point where she doesn't have access to a skill charge when she needs it. What Sack Frags does by refunding a skill charge, instead of actually letting you on field any longer, because that's not even really something you want to do anyways, a lot of her buffs are expiring by the time her 6 charge attacks are done. This giving you extra skill charges lets you rotate faster in perpetuity. It doesn't give a lot of damaging stats, but I think there's a lot of tomfoolery to be had with Sack Frags Nefer. So now let's talk about her artifact sets. For the most part, it's kind of only Night of the Skies Unveiling. It gives crit rate based on your party's moon sign state, 15% for level 1 moon sign, 30% for level 2. And generally Nefer is going to be played in Ascendant Moon Gleam teams. That is her intended playstyle. That is where she does the most damage. But it's possible to play her outside of Ascendant Gleam. I'm not the biggest fan of those teams, I'll admit, and I probably won't be doing very many of them, but it is possible. And in those teams, when this set drops from giving 30% crit rate to 15% crit rate, It does get a lot worse, but also she has such bad set options that it's still pretty good on her. Unless you're running her with Farina and you can afford to run Marushose on her, no other set really even gives you the value of just 15 crit rate, because as I mentioned before, she scales on so few things. She doesn't care about damage bonus, she doesn't really care about attack, which rules out like half the sets in the game right there. She can potentially be run on Gilded, but Gilded Dreams set effect is also very, very weak. So it's really gonna come down to substats, whether your Knight of the Skies Unveiling or Gilded Dreams is better. I feel like I should come up with a shorter name for this because that's really long. Skies Unveiling, Night Sky. I might go Night Sky. Outside of Double Nod Cry teams, these are pretty much our only two options, and neither of them are very good. Oh yeah, I should probably talk about Flop. Again, it's just a bad set bonus. I mean, we can just check numerically. 80 EM, so that's the exact same 2-piece effect as Night Sky. And then the 4-piece, you get some damage bonus, but that doesn't really matter. You're mostly looking at the Lunar Bloom damage bonus increase, 10%. Which again is the same as Knight of the Skies Unveiling. But then this can actually increase the buff that it gives, 25%, 4 stacks. And that 25%, it's not additive, it's multiplicative. So 4 stacks of 25% means doubling that effect from 10 to 20. So it's 80 EM and 20 Lunar Bloom damage bonus versus 80 EM, 10 Lunar Bloom damage bonus, and 15% crit rate. I don't really think I need to tell you which wins. In Ascendant Moongleam teams, of course, this is all you will ever use. This set gives her so much stat value that even if your artifacts are kind of bad, it's most likely worth it to run over anything else. I don't know, I felt like I kept that gear section short, that was nice. But it's also kind of not over, because I found that Nefer's gearing really does not end with her. She is a hyper carry type of character. You dump almost all of your team's resources into making her deal damage. There are currently 3 sets in the game that Nefer really appreciates. These are sets that I do my best to have them on every Nefer team, and they do somewhat impact how her teams are structured, which is kind of why I want to talk about it now. First is Deepwood. She is a dendro unit. She is dealing majority dendro damage. A set that shreds dendro resistance by 30% is insane. If you are running her with Lauma, which believe me, we'll talk about in a second, Lauma does have some innate Dendro Res Shred up to 25% with a crowned skill, which, because of the way elemental resistance works, it has decreasing returns after an enemy's resistance goes below 0. That makes it less imperative to run Deepwood on your teams if Lauma is there, but you're very rarely giving anything up by putting Deepwood on a unit, so you should pretty much just always have it. And almost the same can be said of Silken Moon Serenade, except there are no exceptions. You should always have Silken Moon Serenade on your teams. 120 EM and 10% lunar reaction damage bonus is just too good for her to give up on a supportive set. It's so good that the last set that I need to mention is literally just the worst version of it. Serenade gives lunar reaction damage bonus and it can be triggered off field, so it has more uptime. Instructor is not the same. Can't be triggered off field, so it's only for 8 seconds unless you go refresh it. No damage bonus, and the condition is triggering an elemental reaction, not dealing elemental damage, which is the condition of Serenade. Which different conditions can be better, can be worse. Having to trigger an elemental reaction to get the buff obviously requires you to change your setups, maybe get an element on an enemy before you would otherwise. Like in this team here, I can't run Ino first because then she's not triggering a reaction. But also some units don't deal damage off field, so they can't trigger the effect consistently, like Kirara here, until C4 at least. Pre-C4, Kirara doesn't have any off-field damage, and therefore she can't make use of Serenade's ability to be triggered off-field. Nefer's gearing herself isn't particularly interesting. You have a few options with a clear best one for both. But the way she works as a unit makes you think a lot about how the rest of your team is geared, because you always want to be looking for opportunities to get these 3 artifact sets. I'd probably say you always want Serenade. I'd say you always want Serenade. You also always want Deepwood, but you can potentially get away with not running it if you're running Lauma. Still, just run Deepwood, it's more damage. And Instructors is easily the one you need the least, but it is the strongest effect that we can have in this last slot, and if you can slot it, then you should. Now that we're done about gearing requirements, let's talk about some application requirements. Nefer was very obviously designed in a way that makes it necessary for some blooms to be triggered, but she doesn't get much value from the triggering of the reaction itself, and as long as you have somewhat consistent hydro and dendro, you're pretty fine. Because of course, how the verdant dew mechanic works, over here, your 3 moons are your verdant dews, and when you trigger a bloom, one of them will start to fill up for around 2.5 seconds, which is the time it takes to fill an entire moon. Which does mean 1 bloom trigger means 1 verdant dew, and if she's doing 6 charge attacks in her rotation, each of which use 1 verdant dew, you only need to trigger 6 blooms across her whole rotation. That's not a lot, but it also sets a hard limit on how often she can get verdant dews. Of course, that being around 2.5 seconds, the time that it takes for a moon to fill. You only need enough hydro in Nefer teams to consistently keep generating verdant dews. Any more hydro application than that is doing literally nothing. That's why Aino is such a solid unit with her. Of course, not only does she have an Ascendant Moon Gleam incentive in her kit, which Aino helps her reach, but she has some okay buffs in her C1 and C6. She has pretty low energy requirements. You've all heard the spiel before. I like Aino a lot. I'm a big fan of Aino. I think she's a pretty good unit. She does all that she does, and Nefer doesn't really care about her low application. Now, let's just use all these verdant dews here to illustrate my point. We've got our off-field hydro unit. We've got our Nefer. Let's just start playing this team. Let's see how it goes. Oh, there's a few reasons that Nefer teams want other dendro units. The extra particles can be nice, her burst is useful, they often make for pretty good deepwood holders, and a decent amount of them are good utility characters, like Kirara here, like Byeeee, like Yao Yao, and of course, Lauma is there. And Lauma will do Lauma things. In any case, you also want a second dendro unit so that you can actually go into your first rotation with some verdant dews. So that when you swap into Nefer, you aren't left completely high and dry because your off-field units are actually triggering blooms and getting her some verdant dews. And now, I don't have all 3, but at least I have 2, which is, you know, better than 0 and having to wait for 1. Before anyone's smart in the comments, yes, I know you can do a normal attack on Nefer and then go into your Hydro unit. She is a Catalyst unit, but please, for the love of God, just use another Dendro unit. And with that extremely short and concise introduction, there we have it. There is the basic layout for Ascendant Gleam Nefer teams. Your slots are Nefer, and then so you can trigger your off-field blooms, a Dendro and Hydro off-fielder. And then your last slot, it's kind of just whatever you have. The reason I haven't really talked about Cookie is there's not a lot that she is doing special here. She's mostly just holding buffing gear, of course Deepwood like we talked about, and Sapwood Blade, which I know I've been talking about Ki a lot, but Sapwood Blade is like the #1 reason why you shouldn't get Ki, because at R5 it provides potentially 120 elemental mastery to whoever picks up the leaf, which can be equivalent and occasionally better than the buffs that Ki gives because you have to build for them and there are certain trigger conditions. In any case, Sapwood is quite the strong option in Nefer teams. She always appreciates more EM. It's one of the 3 stats she can use, and Cookie is a good enough holder of Sapwood. She has Deepwood, she has a little bit of defensive utility in her healing. I've built this to be like a weird scuffed hybrid DPS build. I don't know what I'm doing, but I can't really do anything else with the slot, so like I might as well build Cookie to deal a little bit of damage, even if it's only like 5,000 damage a tick. The last thing Cookie does as an Electro unit is she allows Nefer to trigger a spread. Yes, most of Nefer's damage is considered Lunar Bloom damage and therefore can't proc a spread, but the initial hit of her skill and her charge attack are both regular Dendro damage and can trigger spread. And what are her only 2 stats? EM and crit. And what is spread scale off of? Spread isn't accounting for much DPS in the team, but there really just is not another good option for this slot, which is why I have decided to use Cookie. She can hold a good combination of buffing gear while also enabling some stuff herself and being a decent defensive option. There are a few other options that I should probably mention. Sucrose is actually surprisingly decent because even if she's not triggering a swirl, even if she's not getting any sort of res shred with VV, she still has a passive talent that shares a big stupid amount of her EM to the entire team, and Nefer likes EM. Same thing goes for Diona at C6, she gives 200 EM. Fischl can be another option that activates spread for Nefer, just like Cookie does. But of course Cookie has access to Sapwood, which is a very good free-to-play buffing weapon for Nefer. Fischl does not. She gets King Squire. Truly a great craftable. So official teams actually calc quite close to Kuki teams, and for that reason I would pretty much always choose Kuki first, because Kuki, number one, I think is usable in less places, but number two, she brings healing. It's more comfortable. Now for your Hydra slot, Aino is actually the best one here. Again, just like for Flynn's, it's not by a ton, because inherently she doesn't really do that much with her kit. It's only C1 and C6 that give any sort of buff. But those buffs do make her the tiniest bit better than other options. But in terms of feel, I don't even think it's close. In my experience playing Nefer, every Hydra option that isn't Aino just kind of feels horrible with her. No one has it particularly easy. Because Nefer is a unit that does most of her damage through her charged attacks, Nefer is a character who does damage with her charged attacks and doesn't really want to be doing that many normal attacks, especially when you can speed up her field time so significantly. Extending it to do normal attacks just kind of feels awful to me. It also doesn't help that she is a catalyst character, so unlike characters with melee weapons who do one normal attack before they go into their charge attack, she just goes straight into it. So she can't even get the occasional free proc that units like Hu Tao do. For that reason, I have found Yelan to be basically unusable with her, along with the fact that she extends Nefer's rotations and she has long animation times. Yelan just feels disgusting with these new Not Cry units. As for some units that don't need normal attacks, for the most part I'm okay with Kokomi, but of course Kokomi has her circle impact restrictions. She places down her jellyfish, and even though I have come around to sack frags Kokomi, and I have greatly opened up the amount of context I'm willing to use Kokomi in, she's still extremely enemy dependent, and if I am against an enemy who is fairly small or is going to move a lot, I'm not going to use her. So potential option, but she's not always comfortable. Farina is another potential option that is not always comfortable. Of course, she drains your character's HP, so unless you have a healer to make up for that, your team's going to be a whole lot squishier, and Nefer doesn't benefit that much from the damage bonus that Farina gives. So she's taking away from your team and losing a lot of the value that she would otherwise have. Oh, I didn't mention Candace, but she's another character who relies on normal attacks. My second favorite non-Aino option for this slot is Nilou, who's pretty close to having what I want and probably will be my favorite option in the future. That is, once I get C1. Nilou is going to be the next unit that I pick a free constellation for, and her C1 increases the duration of her off-field hydro. While Nilou's hydro application is enough to make a Nefer team just barely function, I find that if I rotate just a little too slowly, I often miss my final charged attack. The aura expires too soon and I don't get another verdant due. Of course, once I get C1, once I get that duration extension, that won't be a problem, but even then I'll have a little bit to complain about, because Nilou has this very long skill animation to get her off-field hydro up, and it can be sped up. Instead of doing triple E, you can do E, normal attack, E, and that is much faster, but if you misinput and you do 3 normal attacks, you don't get any hydro off-field at all. She goes into her on-field mode. So she has weird stuff with uptime at C0, and she can have weird stuff with activating her application at all. Requires a little bit of finesse. And also, yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but she has an 18-second cooldown on her skill. That's a little too long for Nefer teams, so I have her on Sack Sword. Now let's get to my favorite non-Aino option in this slot, which is... where is he? Xingqiu. Now, you may be thinking, what are you talking about? Xingqiu requires normal attacks. That's like his whole thing. He has the rain swords. And also, you were just mentioning about how Nilou has a long skill cooldown. She doesn't even come close. And yet, somehow I am still not running him on Sack Sword. That is, of course, dear viewer, because Xingqiu's rain swords are not the only thing that apply hydro. His orbitals also do. So even though his skill and his burst cooldown are individually too long for Nefer teams, he can alternate between using them. Skill 1 rotation. Burst second rotation. And the whole time, you don't need to do any normal attacks to get access to your hydro application. But if you feel like doing some normal attacks, then you get a little bit of extra damage. I don't know, he's usually not built for damage in these teams. I think he's on, oh dear, a horribly broken set. I want to give a quick shout out to Barbara, who I forgot to mention. She essentially has the same hydro application as please be quiet. Her application is essentially the same as Xingqiu's orbital application, follows the character around, very small AoE, and of course she has the benefit of healing, so overall she's pretty comfortable, but she has the downside of needing to run sack frags. Unlike Kokomi, where sack frags is just a luxury and you can get away with refreshing her skill using her burst the intended way, Barbara has a massive 32-second cooldown. Even when reduced by C2, it's over 25 seconds long. She needs sack frags to be able to get her Hydra up every rotation. So there you go. There's that big long section, only for me to tell you that he'll probably get replaced by Columbina in like 2 months. So let's stop talking about the Hydro section. Let's go back to Aino. And let's go to the Dendro section, because obviously something is wrong here. Why is Lauma not in this team? Lauma is a Dendro unit that was very clearly made for Nefer. She gives a lot of very, very relevant buffs in Ascendant Gleam that basically only Nefer can make use of. And she is the best option for your Dendro off-fielder. That much is obvious. I don't really think I need to tell you that. But I really don't like Lauma in Nefer teams. I'll keep it short because I talked about this in my last video, but in my experience, Lauma just does not feel satisfying to play when you run her with Nefer. She's adding damage in the most simple ways she can do it. She's shredding res, she's giving bonus scaling on the Lunar Bloom damage, she's giving crit rate and damage. It's kind of the thing that Nefer is a really interesting unit to work around. There's not a ton of stuff in her kit that I'm like, yeah, specifically I want to like work with this, I want to tweak her stats, I want to make her build do X, Y, and Z, but she interacts with teammates in very different ways, and Lauma just being an option that doesn't do anything special, just kind of adds damage, feels bad to me. I would much rather use her as like a Hyper Bloom team buffer or a Burgeon team buffer, something in Nascent Gleam where she allows blooms to crit. Additionally, unlike other dedicated supports, she doesn't provide any quality of life unless she's at C1. And Nefa and Citlali both have shields. Escoffier has a bunch of healing in her kit. Granted, that is for Farina, but it also is a nice comfort thing. Iansan has a lot of particle generation and provides electro resonance for Veresa. Same with a Nefer for Flins. I mean, of course, yes, Lauma does generate energy for Nefer, but Nefer's burst, not being that great, makes that much less of a necessity than it is for Flins and Veresa, who actually do want enough energy to use their mini bursts on consistent occasions. Lauma is just damage, which means you need to outsource your comfort to other slots. So I've found that when I want to be running Aino, which is usually because Aino is by far my favorite Hydro applier in this slot, and I'm much better at running Flins with the scuffed Hydro options than I am Nefer. I find that if I also want to play Lauma, I only have one slot left to fit all the things that I want. There's also the factor of her being a 5-star and having a longer burst animation and having insanely high energy requirements. Seriously, like, what is it? I have Lauma at like 190 ER in these Nefer teams, and I'm still not getting my burst every rotation. How much energy are you guys running on your Lauma? Between her long animations, her low quality of life, and her high energy needs, I've just found that I've had a lot more fun with other units in this slot, and especially, like at the beginning of the video you saw, Kirara. I am a massive fan of playing Nefer with Kirara, and in general, I just feel like Nefer needs a little bit more interruption resist. I feel like I've been knocked out of a lot of things, and I really appreciate playing her with a shield. And this doesn't just apply to the playstyle where you hold her charge attack, you don't do cancels, and you do the big animation. Of course, it's nice to not get interrupted and hit out of that, but even when doing charge cancels, she can get hit out of the startup of her charge attack and make it slower to execute all of her cancels. So I find that a shield, even if it is kind of small for whatever reason, maybe you don't have an HP sword, maybe you're running her on instructors, just having that little extra interruption resist is pretty nice. And I'm kind of surprised that Kirara wasn't on their banner, because Kirara is by far my favorite Dendro unit to play with Nefer. And I am so sorry for what I am about to say, but as I mentioned before, she doesn't have off-field Dendro unless she's C4. You don't need a lot of off-field application to get all your verdant dues up. It's just once every 2.5 seconds. So Kirara's C4 only hitting every 3.8 seconds. Doesn't sound like enough, but when combined with Nefer actually on-fielding, absolutely is. But before that, it's going to be a lot more difficult to use here. You might need to split your field time with Nefer and swap back out to her, refresh some buffs. That's also a situation where you might want to put her on Instructor. In any case, she is a big damage downgrade from awesome lauma. I am not going to try to argue that, but I find her so much more consistent and enjoyable that I don't really care. The all 4-star composition makes for a team that rotates a lot faster than her lauma teams, and even if I can't reach the same DPS, I enjoy the feeling of rotating faster. Oh, and of course, another reason why I really like her, which should probably go stated, is Key's really good on her. And that's the reason why I got Key. Yeah, Sapwood is often equivalent and occasionally better, but Sapwood can't stack. In any case, Key requires 3 hits from the wielder's elemental skill to proc, and Kirara can do that very easily just by doing a little short holdy. And there we go, she has the full Key buff up, all 3 sigils. This was actually the team that I tried for a decent amount of time in Stygian. This team definitely struggles with fearless and higher level content. I was pushing a lot with my clears to try to get Battle Hardened Lightkeeper and Frost Knight era with this team. Couldn't quite figure it out. I eventually had to replace Kirara with Nahito to meet the DPS checks, and after that it was pretty easy. But this team does fare pretty well against Menacing, so let's do a quick run against Frost Knight era to show that off. Oh yeah, I've got it. Easy. Not particularly fantastic play. Could probably clean it up a little bit, get a little bit of a faster clear. And I did just level 90 and crown my Nefer this morning. But for a 4-star team and a weapon that's only slightly better than an R5 craftable, I think that's a pretty good clear. And Menacing is by no means a pushover in this Stygian cycle. I have had some struggles getting certain things to clear. So the fact that I can do this fairly easily first try is kind of the point to my original video about Nefer. Like, yeah, lauma is the best dendro option in this slot, but if all lauma is going to get you is a fearless clear when you would have gotten a menacing clear, you're pulling an entire new character, spending all those primo gems, and spending that resin, all to get 1 feather, 100k Mora, and 5 purple books. Oh. No, you're gonna heal. Oh, Nefer just died. I didn't realize that was the thing that could happen. So I'm missing first try, not because I missed the DPS check, but I just died. I just got skill issued. I just got smacked by Mr. Purge the Darkness. Actually, you know what? Hold on. I just realized I haven't been picking up my my leaf. My cookie leaf for this entire clear. And I was like, you know what? I probably should redo the clear when like I'm actually picking it up and I'm playing correctly. But the fact is that I know people are gonna complain about me having key here and that being unrelatable. But we can just do a little math. Key buff right now, every 1000 HP on an R1 key translates to 2 EM. So key is giving a team-wide 102 EM here, which is less than an R4 Sapwood Blade. So in that clear, I effectively did not use my key of Kajnasut because the buffs that it gives and the buffs the Sapwood Blade gives are equivalent, and I didn't pick up the Sapwood Blade buff. So yeah, this could be done faster if you have an R5 Sapwood and you bother to pick up the leaf. Now before I end off the video, I can go through the rest of the dendro options, talk about my opinions about them. Nahida is basically just worse lauma. She does a fine bit of damage herself, but is mostly there to apply dendro and give the little buff that is in her burst. She shares a portion of, actually it's not her EM, it's the character on the team who has the highest EM, so it could potentially be anybody, but she just gives a big EM buff, and Nefer of course cares about EM. All the other dendro options are basically to be considered on utility. And the last offensive dendro option in this slot is Kole, who I actually was having a decent amount of fun with before I started playing around with Kirara more. Her animations can feel a tiny bit long and clunky, but she rotates fairly fast, and she fits within Nefer's rotations pretty nicely. She has extremely good front-loaded dendro application, which isn't useful for the purposes of Verdant 2 generation, but can be for shield breaking or any other sort of mechanic like that. And she has, I believe, just the one minor buff in her constellation of 60 EM for everybody in the party except her after using burst. And then finally, we have the two healing options, 4-star Yaoyao, 5-star byeeee. I don't love either of them, and they kind of both have the same amount of strengths and weaknesses. They both have high energy cost bursts with long cooldowns. byeeee's has a long animation, and Yaoyao's makes you on-field her a little bit to get the full party healing out of it. His skill has better healing, but hers has better application. Of course, Yaoyao throws out Yugui and he sits on the ground for 10 seconds, throwing radishes, which means that she can consistently use sets that require off-field damage, like Deepwood or Serenade, whereas byeeee's skill only hits 3 times, and if you put him on either of those sets, you might have some downtime with their buffs. His burst gives some off-field dendro application, but again, that's a long animation, it's on a 20-second cooldown, and it doesn't even have full uptime. It's only 14 seconds that it's up. They're both weird in their own ways. They're both comfy in their own ways. I find that they work differently in different teams. If you have one built, you probably won't need the other. I think that is everyone really worth talking about for the dendro slot. So let's hit a quick 180 and run right on back to this slot. Because I mentioned before, there's not really much to do with this. Kuki's here because she gives some buffs through her gear and can contribute a tiny bit of healing. She's not really that important, and removing her won't greatly affect the team. So, if no unit is great here, why don't we just put any unit here? This is something else that I really briefly touched upon in my last video, but Nefer having the two combination attributes of being able to have really fast, flexible field time and not having a very good last slot teammate makes it so that having a unit that just pops in and deals a little bit of personal damage still isn't that much worse than having a unit that actually buffs her. Of course, my choice is Sethos, but what if we just go the 5-star Sethos and throw Flynn's in here? Of course, this is a pretty unit-intensive team. I don't expect everybody to have Nefer and Flynn's. But it's just to show that these are two units, both with fairly short and somewhat flexible field times. And if they both have that attribute, why not just put them together? Not the best rotation, but proof of concept. It's not completely comfortable, but they fit within each other's off-field times. And of course, my original choice of Sethos, that's even more true because he requires a lot less field time than Flynn's does. And his field time is more flexible, just like Nefer's is. It's essentially Sethos Teknari, but we've replaced Ticknutty with a unit that does a lot more damage now. Sorry, buddy. Maybe once I get C6 on you, we can see a comeback. But this is really what encapsulates what I love so much about Nefer's team building, is that you have a few base components that you kind of need, and you have a lot of different units that can meet those requirements, but they all slot in slightly different ways, and all your different team configurations will need to be altered just a little bit. Setups need to account for proper artifact buffs, as well as characters need to be able to trigger their buffs, and you need the right combination of application and whatnot. You have a few key factors you're looking for, and what units you want to include will change based on what units you already have. And then finally, in the last slot, you get a wild card. Nobody's great here, so everybody's kind of okay. And her being a dendro unit makes her playable with a lot of the characters that I really enjoy playing. So there you have it. I think that's going to be it for today. A little guide to building teams with Nefer, because she deserves it. She's a cool unit, and she deserves it. I can't sit in the chair? I can't sit in the Nefer chair. This is the worst day ever. Thank you to my channel members. Dorsalfin from twitch.tv/dorsalfin1, Najodo, Rumpelatus, Pegby, Dotiz, Do, ZachZDR, Mudkip172, Beef Potato, Roberto Desu, Big Soup, Buffalo Milk, DB, SJ, Pyre's Flower, Aqua, Bab, Starnova, and our newest member, who, I'm gonna butcher this name, I'm so sorry, Guangshou Zhang? That's probably not it. Join the Discord so you can tell me how to pronounce it. Thank you guys so much for your support. You make it possible for me to take breaks and work at my own pace and make things that I enjoy making. And I always appreciate that very, very, very much. That's gonna be it from me. Hope you learned something. Have a lovely day.